Over the years, Warner Brothers have garnered a pretty awful reputation with their live-action DC movies, with far more misses than hits thus far. But this year's The Flash promises to shake things up by basing itself off the ambitious Flashpoint comic series, which sees Barry Allen visit alternate timelines and cause a bit of time travel mischief. Although generally hopes were pretty low for this one, I wonder why. We know it's not impossible for DC to put out something decent. So did it turn out alright, or were the cameos and fan service not enough to save this one? Okay, this isn't a huge deal overall, but I genuinely was taken out of the movie several times because of it. It's a fucking CGI. I know everyone's quick to jump to the VFX artist's defense.
They're overworked, they're underpaid, they have really strict deadlines.
Look, I get it, but fuck, man. There's a few moments in this movie when it genuinely looks like you're watching the Polar Express. As you know from the trailers, Barry meets up with his younger self in this one, and they're in a lot of scenes together. Sometimes they clearly recorded two different shots and masked them over each other, and it looks completely fine. But then in other scenes, they mustn't have got the right shot, so they just fucking CGI'd one of them in. So on your screen, there's one real Ezra Miller, and one Tarkin from Rogue One. I'm sorry to say, but it's so obvious and kinda looks like shit. Overall, the visuals aren't terrible though. I really like the look of the Batcave, and the Flash's new suit is way better than the one they gave him in Justice League. I'll get a bit more into it later in the spoiler section, but there are just some scenes where it's unbelievable. You're watching a $200 million movie, like, wow. Let's talk about the actual plot of the movie. I'm happy to report that it isn't a total mess, and the story rolls along nicely with no major contrivances or bullshit. I know that's somewhat of a low standard to set, but this is a time travel movie, and if you know how troubled the production was for this one, then you gotta give credit where it's due. They held it together pretty well. Ironically, for a movie about the guy who runs fast, the pacing in this one is kinda slow. It takes a while for the movie to get to the second act, and then the second act itself drags a bit, sort of just waiting for the final shit to happen. Not a huge deal, but just something I picked up on. They probably could have condensed it down to 2 hours and 10 minutes, but instead it runs for 155 minutes. Thankfully though, I was never bored, stuff was always happening. It just might make the movie a bit tough to rewatch, even if you like it. Alright, let's address the elephant in the room, Ezra Miller. Personally, I'm cool with separating the artist from the art. As a Kanye West listener, I've learned to. If you're not cool with that, you might not like what I'm about to say. I thought he was sold in this movie. He seems to fit the character pretty well and did his best with the corny as fuck script that the writers delivered. No, seriously, a lot of Barry's lines are straight out of a 2000s Disney Channel sitcom. It had me waiting for a laugh track at first. Everyone else in this movie is doing fine. Really nothing to say about any of the other performances. If you genuinely just don't like Ezra Miller on screen, like he pisses you off or something, you might be in for a tough time, because he pretty much plays both of the main characters in this one. Once I got over how bad his voice sounds talking back and forth, I was fine. It just sounds normal after a while. Speaking of despicable people, for the majority of the movie there's no real villain, and the obstacle is just sort of the time travel shenanigans. This is an absolute breath of fresh air for a superhero movie. It allows for the movie to actually develop the main character more than a lot of other superhero movies, and sets up actual good motivations that aren't just save the world or stop the bad guy. Barry's motivations are consistent throughout the movie, and it's nice. It's linked well to his character, and he gets some good growth. It's actually surprising how well they handled the emotional moments, and they were probably the best part of the movie, so well done. To balance out the emotional parts, was the movie funny? Sorta. My friend who I saw the movie with and I laughed a solid 30 times throughout the movie, and maybe 10 of those were actually laughing with the movie. The other 20 were just laughing at it. As I said, it's just corny and cheesy as all hell, but still funny nonetheless. And thankfully, they balanced the jokes and the serious stuff nicely, and it's mostly separate. Alright, let's talk about spoilers. Skip to this time frame to avoid them. 3, 2, 1. Alright. So I talked shit about the CGI just before, but there's a few moments in particular where it's just shocking. At the start, when Barry's saving the babies from the hospital, for some reason they couldn't use real babies, so they just CGI them in. I'm sorry, but they just look like shit. Every time Barry goes past the speed of light to do his time travel and his path sort of surrounds him, they go for a stylized look on the people, but it's just too real and ends up being uncanny valley. Genuinely looks awful. And god, the Christopher Reeve and Nicolas Cage cameos. I get why they couldn't actually get Christopher Reeve for it, but why the fuck couldn't they get Nicolas Cage? They ended up just doing him dirty with the CGI. I can say bad things about virtually every other aspect of the movie, but I gotta say, the main through line of Barry learning to let go, letting his mum die but still managing to save his dad, it just had me feeling some type of way. I wasn't expecting this movie to make me feel anything, but It was just such a good, bittersweet moment, man. I loved it. A couple other random things. Explaining time travel using spaghetti was surprisingly good and actually makes sense, unlike Avengers Endgame's shitty explanation of time travel. But when Barry goes back, there's supposed to be his past self living there, right? The whole fucking movie relies on that as he teams up with his younger self. But then in the climax, when they go back a couple of times to save Supergirl, there's no version of them there from the fight. Like, aren't there supposed to be 4 Barrys at that point? I don't know. I think there's a couple of nitpicks for how the time travel functions, but overall, it works well for the story, and there's no major holes in it. Another thing, I thought it was super weird how in the first fight against Zod, Batman is just fully willing to kamikaze it and sacrifice himself. Like, I just thought that was a bit out of character for Batman. Overall though, Michael Keaton's inclusion was solid and not overbearing. Speaking of Batman, what the fuck was that ending with the George Clooney Bruce Wayne? Is he just Batman now or what? With the universe sort of reset, they can just replace whoever they feel like now. It's just crazy, man. So overall, I think this one is a pretty good time. None of the bad aspects really brought down the good to me. It was sort of just all mixed in. If you're an emotional movie watcher, you could genuinely get teary-eyed at some moments. That's how strong I think the emotional moments are. It fully accomplishes its goal of just being a fun time travel superhero movie. Even though it could have benefited from a slightly shorter runtime and a little bit more time in the oven, it's pretty good. But sadly, it's a bit stained in the public eye because of Ezra Miller being an absolute but it managed to keep me entertained, and I'm sort of interested now in what's going to happen to the DCEU. I'm going to give The Flash a 7 out of 10. If you've made it this far, a like and a sub would be much appreciated. Cheers for your time, and take it easy.